Alright, Nioh 3, a game that I honestly never expected to come out, but it was a welcome surprise when it did. Because Nioh has always been a franchise that I really liked, however, it somehow never turned into one that I truly loved. Among the Souls community, and my own viewers specifically, there seems to be a strange lack of overlap when it comes to appreciation between these franchises. Now of course, despite having elements of Souls, the heart of this game, its combat, is often compared to Team Ninja's other franchise, Ninja Gaiden. Although I personally cannot confirm that, because for me, this is Ninja Gaiden, a game on NES from my childhood. Regardless, Nioh 3 changes one of my biggest gripes with the previous titles, the mission-based level design. So I do wonder how the interconnected open field design, as they call it, will compare to it. But more importantly, what better way to play this game with all your heart than to go through my first playthrough only leveling up the heart stat to my heart's desire? Well, in truth, there are many better ways than doing that, because it's hardly a surprise that to center leveling heart cardiactually makes beating the game even harder. In fact, it's pretty heartbreaking to see how little actual benefit you get at 99, even compared to being at level 1, when you see the numbers side by side. The added damage output is minimal, the extra ki regeneration is negligible, and honestly the increase in ki itself was not even all that noticeable to begin with. Same with the extra health, since defense from armor is much more meaningful than HP in this game. Moreover, when I realized how almost the same weapons scale with the intellect stat, I almost had a change of heart, since it would be a much smarter choice to solely level intellect instead. But hey, on this channel we don't play smart, we play hard. In fact, I even tend to add nonsensical additional restrictions for, well, no good reason at all. In this case you could even call it adding artificial difficulty. And most impactfully, I chose to spend more time in samurai mode over the newly introduced ninja mode. Main reason for that, other than playing the demo, was that I was in Discord contact with my bonfire buddies Arcane and Doomwolf, two guys after my own heart, which kinda made clear to me that ninja mode is incredibly unbalanced to the point of being almost broken in the hands of a Nioh novice. Now arguably in the hands of a Nioh veteran, or with the correct build, neither of which apply to me, samurai mode could be even more effective and powerful than ninja mode. No, the actual imbalance that I'm getting at is that acquiring effective results in samurai mode takes considerable effort, especially when not using your favorite weapons, whereas ninja mode will allow you to get effective results even when practically just spamming your way through the game. And thus I chose an experience closer to the previous titles. Additional downsides from ignoring your other stats is that you can only have a single spell equipped at a time, soul cores don't provide any special effects, heavy armor will be too heavy for you, and nearly every accessory is inaccessible. It's basically like going through the games with an OnlyFans subscription. Regardless, it definitely sounds mild enough for a first playthrough, but also not exactly for the faint of heart. In fact, this will allow me to put my heart and Souls-like into the game. And I have a heart of gold, so I won't let anyone take that from me. And therefore, let's see if a Nioh 3 playthrough with heart at its core will turn out to be a hardcore experience.
Now get on your knees and put that heart to work.
Alright then, I have half a heart to just skip through the prologue section, but this is a new game, so if I want to go in hard, I will have to get the basics off my chest first. Now, despite the fact that we can still create our own character like in Nioh 2, we play as a historical figure named Tokugawa Takichio, which leads to some strange connotations since the other guy is supposed to be my brother. Regardless, we are introduced to the traditional samurai style first and the ninja style right after. Although for each mode we only have access to 4 of the weapon classes for some reason. And actually 3 of the samurai ones scale with the heart stat. So at least they do provide us with some state-of-the-art weaponry. Now in the previous games heart was associated with the single katana, which will in fact be my main weapon throughout this playthrough. For ninja mode however, single katana scales with strength instead. So my main setup was a single katana for samurai and dual katanas or claws for ninja. Now although I don't ever attempt to follow the stories in these games, it is at least interesting to see characters like Hanzo and Fuku return. No idea how Fuku instantly recovered from getting stabbed in the stomach, but her immediate retort was Nioh mama, or go Fuku yourself. And there's actually also something quite magical, or heck even uncanny, about your own character speaking in a cutscene. But it is a nice touch that I have only seen before in Code Vein. Unfortunately, despite the same blood coursing through our veins, somehow, any attempts of stopping our possessed brother was instantly in vain. But no worries, this fight is meant to be lost. In fact, even if you win, you will still lose. It's one of those encounters. However, it's a shame that you don't even obtain a reward if you do manage to win. So afterwards he tries to kill us to become Shogun instead of me, while scolding me for not understanding what that even means. And unironically, I did in fact not understand what Shogun meant, other than it being some sort of a high-ranking title. I always thought that Ishin from Sekiro was a Shogun, because he's all show and well, also a lot of gun. Regardless, our guardian spirit saves us by transferring us into a sort of pocket dimension, which later on becomes our hub area. And here we get to choose between 2 versions of guardian spirit, which will be my only way of obtaining a level in either strength or skill. In fact, this choice is mandatory. I chose skill since more light armor pieces will have a skill requirement, and since I will not be able to level up my maximum weight limit, I will be stuck with light armor for the entire playthrough anyway. And then our guardian spirit allows us to travel back in time. In the world of Nioh, many characters have guardian spirits, and for some reason ours happen to be a time-traveling chihuahua. Regardless, at this point I got my first opportunity to strengthen my heart, which really got my blood pumping. And as a side note, the additional damage gained for your melee weapons is percentage-wise higher initially, given that the base damage of the weapon is much lower. But if melee weapons are the heart of Nioh's combat, then range attacks are the liver and gallbladder. And it just so happens that, contrary to the previous games, all 3 ranged weapon types scale with heart. Not merely bows this time, but also the rifles and cannons, also referred to as artillery. Although to be fair, in practice, as long as you get headshots, you will either kill an enemy in 1 or 2 hits regardless. Still, it is a great way to thin out a group of enemies in order to even the odds. At least when done in a smart way, because I of course do it the hard way, given that I'm a little odd. Fortunately, ancient Japanese folklore can also be a little odd, because other than humans, we also encounter yokai, which are basically a whole variety of otherworldly monsters. And fighting against humans and against yokai functions in a rather distinct way. But more about that later. Because the tutorial boss is, at least at this point in the game, very much still human. But he can absolutely hit like a monster with his massive Japanese Zweihander. Ah, damn it, what's that weapon called again? Oh, Dachi. I see. Then again, it could also be a Nagamaki or a Naginata or a No Dachi. Or that weapon used by the Japanese version of James Bond, you know, a Dr. No Dachi. But regardless, it's merely the tutorial boss, so this is meant to ease you into the gameplay of this, and I just died against the tutorial boss, didn't I? Huh. Well, that's disheartening. Yeah, you better get used to poise, hyper armor, hard-hitting hits hitting hard, and even slow bosses being only comparatively slow. But at least in the case of humans, draining all of their ki, this game's version of stamina, allows for an instant critical attack for a nice chunk of damage. You are also then introduced to the living artifact system, your ultimate mode, but since I wasn't willing to make use of that, I also ignored that part of the tutorial and simply ended the fight the old-fashioned way. And speaking of the old ways, we are then reintroduced to another recurring character in this franchise, namely Honda, or Tristan in the dub. Or that might be a different Japanese franchise. Whatever it may be, with the speed of a roaring motorcycle, Honda slowly rows us towards the first field area. So here's where we get to the heart of the matter. Nioh 3's new world design. You can almost think of it as Nioh's main missions and optional missions merged together into a connected world. Almost, as in sort of but not really. The main objective is the red area in the middle. But around that there are side objectives, and very meaningful ones in fact. Because this is how you obtain skill points for the skill tree, passive skill points for special bonuses, and a whole lot of other benefits. And one of those skill points you get automatically along the way. While I still almost missed it since I was looking up at the ominous presence in the sky, causing me to fall off a cliff. But the first skill point allows us the ability to unlock our other two stances, because in this game you only start with your mid stance. High stance I've always preferred. Low stance I mistakenly regarded as bad. And the remaining stance is mid, but also good. But of course they all have their own functions, their own unique skills, and can even be chained together mid-combat, or even mid-combo. However, a new addition in this game is the ability to deflect Sekiro style, which I honestly completely underutilized until way too late into the game. In a nutshell, deflecting is not a gimmick, it is extremely beneficial, but more about that later. At least something you should do, like I did, is to follow this path here, because there we encounter a kawaii Neko-chan. Oh, katje is een beetje een bolletje en is zacht en moet geknuffeld worden.
He's as fluffy as a marshmallow sandwich.
Yeah, the Scampus is the greatest yokai ever conceived, and if you follow it, it will always give you either a samurai or a ninja skill point. But of course my favorite cute animal is the infamous Heartvarg. And there's also another adorable animal up in the sky. Although if they move around a lot, you might have to shoot it many times both with and in a row. Because they have a tendency to weasel their way out of you shooting it down. But if you do, in addition to a skill point, you will get a skill added to your skill tree which normally would not be accessible. And in a lot of cases this is an upgrade to an already existing skill. In this particular case, a jumping lightning slash for the katana. However, this particular skill is tied to either high stance or low stance. So my next goal was to unlock those stances. And there was also a great skill for high stance in the previous games, the ki explosion that hits all around you, also known as an AO ki attack. But in this game it's not tied to high stance at all. In fact, the spin to win combo ender is not only automatically part of your katana moveset, but also usable in every stance instead of merely in high stance. And the AO ki is especially effective if you also unlock the follow-up attack. Around the map you will also encounter these mini gauntlets, referred to as lesser crucibles. They are also less crucial, but the first one will unlock the spirit skill from your guardian spirit, which is an elemental attack that doesn't consume any ki, can be used even when in the middle of another animation, or when you're completely out of ki, which can in fact save your life, because in this game, when a hit drains your entire stamina bar, you can't even move anymore until you get it back. Other than that, it's great to use at the end of a combo, or when you no longer have any ki left to attack with, allowing your ki to regenerate in the meantime. So this kind of functions like the yokai skills from the previous game, although those are now turned into summoning spells that we unlock later on. And speaking of the previous game, I found none other than the first boss Suzuki just horsing around as a field boss. And Suzuki might not have that much horsepower, but getting empowered by the Dark Realm will make Suzuki swift. Not to the point that it will drive you insane, but you do have to keep in mind that he can also kick you right in the face when you get behind him.
Never walk behind a horse. You would have to hate horses not to know that.
Another mini-boss was the Gaki King, which is actually new to this game. And it has a gimmick where you need to break the Amrita on his legs to make him fall down. Amrita are those crystals and is also basically this game's version of Soul, so to speak. Now this will eventually become a recurring enemy later on, and I guess since it disappears into thin air when defeating it, it technically could be the same one over and over again. However, before he vanished, I did check if he had a heartbeat, and there was no Gaki pulse. So I'm pretty sure he was in fact dead. Regardless, now it's time to get to what lies at the heart of this map, the first Crucible, where we encounter our first proper boss fight. What the hell is a Crucible? Well, I didn't pay attention to the story, but I think it is what calls forth that giant monster in the sky. So it's essentially like a demonic phone created by the inventor Alexander Cruci Bell. At least that sounds lore accurate enough to me. But before I made my way to the first proper boss fight of the game, I wanted to make sure that I would acquire a specific Crucible weapon, because specific weapon skills can only be acquired from weapons that are unique to the Crucibles. In fact, there are 3 katana specific skills that you can acquire there. One of which I unfortunately never acquired, one I only acquired extremely late into the game, which is unfortunate because it has a disgusting amount of damage output. But the third one I did manage to acquire, and it is stylish as hell. I am the storm that is approaching. Or I guess I am the good weather that is leaving, because it took quite a while before I actually started to implement it. And I mostly used it outside of boss fights. Because as you can understand, it's really good against groups of enemies. However, the thing is that the moment you sheath your weapon, that counts as a deflect. Which is what makes such a lengthy animation functional to begin with. And on top of that, good against human NPC mini-bosses. However, as it turned out, I would acquire another attack soon that is actually beyond broken against human NPC bosses. To the point that I expected to eventually get nerfed. But before that, we have our first main yokai boss fight against Fortune Teller Baba. Yakotsu means fortune teller in Japanese, and my source for that is Trust Me Bro. Now, yokai fights are a bit different from human boss fights, as they don't regenerate their ki, and when they run out of it, they will lose all of their poise, making them flinch with every single hit. But what yokai bosses have been able to do ever since Nioh 2 is to enter a Dark Realm phase, in which they will in fact regenerate their ki, and your ki regeneration is massively slowed down. But on top of that, yokai ki bars consist of 2 bars on top of each other, so to say. And if you deplete the second layer, you will be able to perform a critical attack on them. And in addition to that, you can deplete their maximum ki, making that process a lot easier. Especially countering the red burst attacks with an R2 is the most effective way of doing that. Also, some weapons are simply better at it than others, and unfortunately the sword is not that great at it. On top of that, the main struggle with ki management comes from depleting it by sprinting and dodging. However, deflecting costs no ki and can even replenish it a bit. So once again, treating it almost like Seg Nioh, rather than regarding deflecting as a gimmick, is definitely how I would approach things a second time around. Not too overwhelming for a first proper main boss fight, but certainly no pushover either. Although I would use more harsh language in my own language. Something like, ja, dan moet van kotsen, bye bye. But in the end, my own grandmother hits harder than this granny. Then again, my own grandma hits like a grandmotherfucker, so that's not really a fair comparison to begin with. Now, after clearing the first Crucible, we gain access to the hub area, where we encounter the blacksmith. However, several functions from the previous games are not yet accessible until we complete certain side quests. So for now, she is not that useful yet. However, the characters from the tutorial are present here as well, calling out for you. Like Hanzo for example, and you need to listen to your heart when he's calling for you. Now first of all, these dojo missions provided me with training gear which I would actually be wearing for a very long time, because remember that the majority of the armor that I pick up, I simply won't have the stat requirements for, and it took me a while before I decided to actually resort to forging armor at the blacksmith. Keep in mind, that is very expensive. Then again, with my heart already at 25, I don't need money, I don't even need fame. All I need is the power of love, although it is a curious thing. But what these training sessions are really for, is to unlock certain parts of your weapon and ninjutsu skill trees. And to allow you to equip soul cores, which in this game either functions as summons, which in this context is equivalent to the yokai skills from the previous game, but instead of you transforming into one, it will spawn a yokai separate from you. Or alternatively, you can use them as equipable spells. And in my case, I can only have one at a time, and of course only at base level damage, since I cannot level up my magic stat. So I mainly chose to use this for buffs, although the previous boss gives you access to the Water Familiar spell, which might be the type of spell that I should have made better use of, because proccing elemental status effects was definitely way more tricky under these circumstances than when you can have multiple spells equipped. But speaking of elemental familiar spells and a good summon, what I ran into next could provide me with both, although not at the same time. Because what happened is that I randomly ran into Tamagotchi from Nioh 2, and this would actually become my main summon throughout at least most of the playthrough. Because just like he can do against you, he can rip like a Beyblade, making for a nice multi-hit against enemies, which also inflicts wind damage. Which makes sense that he has that type of elemental damage, although that is actually something that didn't exist back in Nioh 2. They brought that element back from Nioh 1, however they didn't choose to bring back earth damage, or in a sense they did, because wind in Nioh 3 is in fact what earth was in Nioh 1. Back in Nioh 1, wind damage would reduce the enemy's attack power, and earth damage would increase the amount of ki damage that they take. However, in this game, wind damage increases the amount of ki damage, so although they brought back wind and not earth, they chose to turn wind into what earth was. Hey, obviously I don't want to insult the designers, but what on earth were those windbags thinking? But joking aside, I also have to be critical regarding bringing back enemies from the previous games. Because initially it was definitely a cute callback. But not so much anymore when you realize that there are 2 more Tamagotchi encounters in the game, on top of many other bosses that they brought back. Not to mention that almost every regular enemy is one that you have encountered in the previous games. There's barely anything new. In fact, a lot of enemies that I thought were unique to Nioh 3 were simply DLC enemies from the previous games that I forgot about. So although this game absolutely deserves high praise, I think it's completely fair to say that I think that they went completely overboard with the reused content. However, having said that, at least one example of a good way to bring back a previous boss is the one that we encounter next at the end of the caves in this area. Because yes, that is Hella Umbrella from Nioh 1, or Hino Emna in Japanese. However, it is not the same fight as before. She has obvious similarities to her old moveset, but they did in fact change things around quite a bit. Now, despite that, I probably would have been better off using a more passive approach against her, since that was a very effective method against her in Nioh 1, where you don't try to dodge through her attacks, instead you just outspace her, stay just outside of her hitboxes, and then go in for an attack and move out of her reach again. Although, I don't know if it's just me being sloppy, or if they also changed these projectiles, but I actually had to rely on anti-paralysis needles to save myself, because I did not manage to avoid these projectiles with any sort of consistency. However, it is a very nice touch that her dive attack is now a burst counter, meaning that you can actually punish that move. After all, back in Nioh 1, burst counters didn't exist yet. But in the end, this sort of succubus could go and suck it. And although I assumed that this counted as random side content, it was in fact part of Honda's request, which is why we went south to begin with. However, in order to prevent things from going south against human mini-bosses, I wanted to try out a new weapon type that I acquired for my ninja mode. Because the claws have a seemingly infinite attack string, where all you need to do is to hold triangle and you will keep attacking as long as you have ki, and you're even moving forward while doing so. Well, against Honda himself this wasn't actually all that effective, as he is too much of a chat to just keep blocking. However, when I encountered the next NPC mini-boss, my suspicion was in fact very much confirmed. This attack is utterly broken against humans, because either they will just take the damage, or if they keep blocking, it will simply drain all of their ki.
Fuck! Nunchuck fuck! Balls!
Yeah, you see? But it's cheesy as hell. Oh, hey, hello, don't cheese me! What the hell? Get the fuck break the hand of the... And that... What the fuck? I cheese the ever-living hell out. Then he just kills me when he has like a single HP left. What the fuck is that? Son of a bitch. That's what you call Swiss cheese. It's very cheesy, but there are holes in it. Wait, he doesn't want to speak to me because Hanzo is with me? Anti-social dick. To be fair, that makes him quite relatable if you ask me. Hanzo, can you go away then? Okay, hold on a second. Hold on. I'm helping you out, guy. I'm helping you out, Ito. Sorry, Ito wants you Nito hero. Okay, yeah, you can go outside, Hanzo. Just wait for me. I just have to speak to Ito. Okay, Ito, I'm alone. Hanzo, can you not follow me, you Well, just have to come back here at another point. Huh? Wait, what the hell? We have Ultra Neko-chan. Oh my god, what the hell? Where did this come from? It's an Ultra Neko-chan.
This is more pussy than even I can handle.
Is he gonna say giggity? Should I say giggity? Are other people allowed to say giggity? Giggity. What? Nothing, it's stupid.
Now, before making my way to the next boss fight of the game, I first decided to help out one of my fellows to acquire medicine for his terrible headaches, as I unfortunately can very much relate to that. Even though the medicine came from a literal pile of shit, called a nupepu, or as I would like to call it, a new poopa. But trust me, if your headaches are bad enough, you would take medicine even if it came out of a literal pile of shit, as long as it performs well enough. Now, the poopa itself didn't perform well enough as it went down on the first try. Even if it had a second try, I don't think it would have been sufficient. Perhaps a third try would have. Regardless, I do feel bad for it, so I think I should have given it a new pep talk. Or as the Dutch expression goes, hem een hart onder de riem steken. Which translates to put a heart underneath someone's belt. And no, you perverts, that doesn't imply making someone hard underneath the belt of their pants. Now, even though that mini quest wasn't much of a headache, not having the ability to soul match any of my equipment could become a headache later on in the game. But by doing a side quest for the blacksmith, we now have access to that function. Unfortunately, I don't really see why they felt the need to change how soul matching works, because now in addition to money, you also need to dismantle a whole bunch of stuff. Which doesn't sound like a big deal, but selling your unnecessary equipment is pretty much the only alternate way to quickly obtain money. Regardless, that's all for later anyway, so continuing on with the main quest, we came to a castle of dark illusions, which unfortunately we could not drop on anyone's head by knocking its flotation ring off. But the whole point of the illusions here was that the boss of this area has a special ability to create these illusory feint attacks in order to throw you off. So first the illusion attacks you, but then the real attack follows. Pretty cool concept, and this is not a Baba, by the way. Lots of Babas in this game. They could at least have changed it to Abba for variety. And to be honest, this guy did make me move around like a dancing queen, because it is quite a bit more intense than the previous fights were. Not merely moveset wise, but also damage wise. For example, if you miss this particular burst attack, yeah, enemies can not only hit fast, but they can also hit really hard. And despite the fact how empowered our own heart is, we don't hit as hard. Yeah, that's basically Nioh in a nutshell. Nioh power. At the very least, leveling heart at least gives you a little bit of additional HP. However, only a handful of levels into Constitution would have had the same effect. And more importantly, defense from armor means more in this game than the amount of HP you have. And if you want to wear heavy armor, you would be leveling the stamina stat. And the stamina stat also gives additional HP, less than Constitution, but more than the heart stat. Damn it, I don't have stamina. Yeah, he's out of stamina completely. Okay, good. Okay, heal. Tamagotchi and rebuff. Fuck, I missed, but he missed me as well. Oh, what am I doing? I don't make use of the fact that I broke his key. Fuck. Okay, nice. Yeah, break ski. Come on, keep going, keep going. Shit, he still had time to recover. No! Heal, that's my last healing item. Okay, he's down. Okay, good. Oh, I almost have him. Yeah, got him. Got him. Ooh, that was intense.
Bye-bye, Baba.
No, it's Bob.
Yeah, that was definitely a proper main game boss fight, that's for sure. Did I just kick him? I just kicked him. I'm such a dick. No idea how I managed to still be so heartless, but let this be the jumping off point where the difficulty is starting to increase. But hey, I was hungry for it. Hungry enough to eat a horse. Unfortunately, I might have bitten off more than I could chew, because the tutorial boss was back on horseback, causing me to eat some dust instead. Because again, bosses can hit really hard, but also really fast, and this one in addition can move around really fast. And despite the fact that I'm solely leveling up my ki, I was running into some key management problems because I was constantly running after him. In hindsight, I should not have done that. Instead, I should have let him come to me and focus on deflecting rather than dodging. Because to emphasize once more, do not ignore the deflect mechanic in this game. I know it didn't exist back in Nioh 1 and 2, which is perhaps why it felt more natural for me to just dodge everything. But the thing is that other than grab attacks, pretty much anything can be deflected. Including projectiles that he fires from a distance. Heck, even the fire wave across the ground can also be deflected rather than jumped over. Huh? What happened? He had a sort of a weird mini stagger? I'm not even sure what happened. Okay, let's not question it then. No! I missed! I missed again. Heal. Yeah, okay. Maybe I have him now. Yeah, I got him. Oh, okay. Oh, I got lucky with that final red attack then. Because that basically saved me at the end. I was out of healing. Damn, that was quite a bit tougher. Especially because he just moves around so much. Well, there you go. When you fall off your horse, you get right back up and you eat that horse. But of course, never put the heart before the horse. Because speaking of old war horses, in the next Crucible, we would have the first of 2 encounters with the main antagonist of this chapter, Takeda Shingen. But before that we had some unexpected things beyond my expectations that I didn't expect. Yeah. I actually learned from a Kane's video that you can apparently burst counter these cards before they burst. I didn't know that, but I did at least burst out laughing when the next NPC mini-boss, Kos, or some say Kosaka, somehow got stuck in the lava. You'll love it to see it.
Oh, hot, 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 hot! Hot, 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 hot!
Unfortunately, I did not pick up any of the other 2 Crucible skills along the way, because that would certainly have helped me out. Or, on the other hand, I should have made better use of the one I already had. Or to be more specific, not immediately declaring it not useful enough in this fight, without taking a relevant little aspect such as timing into consideration, given that this is also a deflect move and not merely an AoE. But at the very least I did give it a try, whereas there's also the unsheath move, that I mentioned countless of times on stream, specifically that I should not forget to use that particular skill, but despite mentioning it, I would indeed forget to use it. Then I said I would make sure to try it in the next fight. I would forget to use it again. Rinse and repeat until I finished the game and realized that I never used it at any point. So let's just refer to that as a retroactive restriction. At the very least, something I did finally slowly started to implement was low stance. Which is a stance I kind of had a low opinion of in the previous 2 games. Other than for proccing status effects. Mainly because individual hits from it are weak. in order to compensate for its low ki consumption. However, that's not even necessarily true, because you have this low stance specific flurry of attacks that does a pretty decent amount of damage. Oh, and for the people saying that Nioh is not actually a Souls-like, this flurry skill is literally called Night Rain. Yeah, check that checkmate, mate. Well, unfortunately it wasn't a checkmate against Takeda yet, because it didn't take long before we had a rematch with him, where he went, oh how unexpected, into full demon mode, which is basically the trend in every Nioh game and even also in Wolong. And in case your immediate question is, what is Wolong? Well, about 16 main missions I believe. And speaking of Wolong, this particular fight is where I actually, instinctively, started to deflect certain attacks. Because this boss might seem rather chaotic, but his moves are actually very well telegraphed. In fact, this might be one of my favorite fights in the game. However, having said that, that doesn't mean that dodging is not effective. In fact, quite a bit he does can even be side-strafed, if you're quick enough. Regardless, after getting pretty close a few attempts, the next one went very, very poorly, causing me to go through all of my healing items, but the boss still had a third of his health bar left. And thus, with a heavy heart, I was ready to declare this attempt a failure. However, when you fall on hard times, and what's in front of you is a hard egg to crack, don't crack under the blood pressure. If you say aorta, you have to say B-orta as well, because quitting is not an option, and therefore keep fighting to your heart's content. That was not... Oh, come on, seriously? How the hell was that not the right timing? Yeah, I'm not gonna win, I'm completely out of healing and I'm almost dead. Quick! I still have too much health. Kill him! Yeah, I got him! I got him! That was very unexpected, but hey, I'm definitely not complaining. I'm definitely not complaining. That was a good boss. Very chaotic, but definitely a good boss. I think it's pretty evident by now that me choosing to level hard exclusively had absolutely no relation to any gameplay mechanics whatsoever, but simply because it wouldn't exactly be hard to implement a lot of hard-related wordplay in the script of this video. After all, wordplay lies at the heart of my commentary style. And evidently, time travel lies at the heart of this game's narrative, because now we go even further back in time to the second map of the game. Yes, we are only at the second map of the game. Ironically, despite the fact that this is the third Nioh game, my reaction to its length has to be, whoa, long. Be that as it may, it's still not even close to the length of the massive nose of the great Tengu that he was about to stick up all of my business. The moment I realized I actually had to fight this character, I was like, no thank you. Well, actually my chat said that, but I certainly shared that sentiment. Now, having said that, the Great Tengu wasn't all that great, and I don't mean quality-wise, because it's actually a good boss fight. Of course, not as good as the fight against Minamoto in the Nioh 2 Tengu Disciple DLC, which is what this is a callback to, as we are reintroduced to that very character. Apparently, even this area itself is a callback to that DLC. But what I was referring to is the difficulty of this fight, despite me running out of healing items rather quickly. And probably a very large reason for that is that this time, I mostly was in ninja mode. And to emphasize again, this mode is absolutely overpowered in the hands of a novice compared to samurai mode. Possibly could have been less noticeable if I used an axe rather than a regular sword, since that is basically my go-to weapon. But when you think about it, an axe is exactly not the type of weapon that you can spam, and the whole reason that ninja mode feels so overpowered is that you can spam, and more importantly, the game basically allows you to get away with that kind of approach. I'm not sure if there's anything in samurai mode that the game would not punish you for if you try to spam it. Well, better just go and take those victories, because it wouldn't take long before we would reach the next major difficulty spike. Because now we enter the nation's capital, Kyoto. Which I didn't even know, by the way, that Kyoto used to be Japan's capital. And there is definitely darkness over the capital, as there are 3 seals that we need to purify, each with its own boss fight protecting it. And before that, there are hordes of Nioh mages along the way as well. Their most powerful magic being conjuring up random nonsensical bullshit. Because I think the difficulty setting that they are playing on is 1 HP and a dream of the Nioh. Now I technically went in the wrong direction, because on the level recommendations for each seal, the one I was headed to was the final one. However, that's the nature of an open field design. You're not forced to go in a particular direction. And in hindsight, the upcoming boss was not actually the hardest of the 3. Unfortunately, it was in fact the first one that I really did not like. It is an interesting encounter in principle, given that he has Yorumitsu's yokai summoning box from the second Nioh 2 DLC, while we are fighting him together with her descendant from the first Nioh 2 DLC. But mechanically, this fight is basically just pure chaos, where the boss was given unreasonable ki and hyper armor as to not get instantly overwhelmed from taking a double pounding. So the result caused some Kagetoki Doki panic that my poor pounding heart could barely take. So in the end, when I was out of healing, I basically just stayed at range while waiting for red attacks. Which he pretty much just refused to do, so in essence Minamoto just finished him off. In fact, I actually think that he is an immortal summon who is not even an optional summon to begin with. So even that aspect of the fight is actually kinda stupid when you think about it. Yes, a lot of cool bosses in this game, but this particular one I would delete from the game in a heartbeat if I could. And speaking of beating hearts, the one good thing about this boss is that with Yorumitsu's yokai box in our possession, we can now use 2 yokai summons instead of 1. And with access now to a new spirit vein all the way back in the first area, almost Metroid style if you will, but there we encountered the evolution of Pikachu, Raichu, which could serve as my own personal pocket defibrillator, that thing in the hospital where they go like, clear, you know, that one. Sorry, but I don't want the language police to put me under cardiac arrest for mispronouncing it. And the beauty of this is that our next boss is a water boss, and therefore weak to lightning. Although I have no idea what the fuck it's supposed to be, but I fear that J.K. Leach's wife Babsa Jr. would consider this abomination cute somehow. As we would call it over here, ze heeft een klein hartje. Okay, very nice. Tamagotchi. Evolved Pikachu. Now I choose you. Tamagotchi. Yeah, quickly. Okay, nice. Oh, oh! Can you parry that? Looks like it. Oh, oh, shit. No. Heal, heal. Oh, that was a rat attack. Heal. Okay. That was a lot easier than I expected. To be fair, I did, by summons, did ridiculous amount of damage to him. Especially also the lightning one did a lot of key damage. So that was definitely very good. Okay. I hardly even could see what this boss actually was doing. Except for the end where he started jumping around with the giant icicles. You know what? Even though I'm not using one, since they don't scale with heart, it would have been very appropriate for this boss to drop a water-imbued Kusarigama. After all, that would also be an icicle. Anyway, only one seal remaining. And there we encountered none other than Electric Dummy Muscle Mummy. Now this is where things were spiking up and got hard. You know, in reference to the difficulty, because this was a tough fight. Given that this dominatrix has electrics up her sleeve. And despite having 91 heart at this point, she made things even more hard. Because, due to her relentless attacks, I was constantly out of ki, meaning that taking only a single hit could stunlock me into oblivion. So once again, and I know it starts to sound like a lecture or a deflecture at this point, but to emphasize again, deflecting has not been introduced as a gimmick in this game. Of course, just like any other mechanic, it's not actually necessary, but it is highly advisable to make good use of it. As it is quite understandable from a design perspective, that if you're able to deflect as a samurai, or you can move fast as fuck as a ninja, that boss fights are going to be designed around that principle. But in addition to the problem of my ki being depleted, I had problems depleting her ki, which in turn meant not a lot of extra damage opportunities, and certainly no total ki break for a critical attack right in her stomach. After all, a way to a woman's heart is through her stomach. In fact, in general I had problems inflicting sufficient ki damage, because although the main reason I was sticking to the katana was because I was simply getting used to it at this point, and the spear and the kestis weren't really doing it for me. Although in hindsight I guess I should have diversified my own weapons a little bit. Then again, absence makes the heart grow fonder, so it does work with the theme in a sense. But the thing is that I mainly used axes and odachis in the previous games, and switchglaives in Nioh 2 specifically. But unless you are pretty much a master at using the katana is not really a master at anything. Neither when it comes to depleting enemy health, or depleting an enemy's ki. However, contrary to the previous games, dual katanas also scale with heart, instead of scaling with skill. And it just so happened that I picked up a set of purple rarity dual katanas, with a higher level than my single katana, and it also happened to be at +1. So given that Muscle Mummy became a heavy burden, perhaps that would be one way of lightening my load. So, cross-slash my heart and hope not to die this time. Well, not that I used the cross-slash move, because you know that's the unsheath move of this weapon class, so I guess the same principle as with the single katana was applicable here as well. Maybe even twice as much. What the hell? I don't know what it is. I survived, but I didn't know what happened. Ah, water sword! And wind! Okay, I got her. Oh my god. She could stack a lot of damage against me, but I managed to stack a lot of damage against her there. Jesus fuck, that was one hell of a difficulty spike. Damn, there was a lot of visual clutter in this fight. Other than that, I think the fight is really cool, but the visual clutter is definitely, that is kind of fucked up. That is definitely fucked up. But hey, despite the fact that she made my heart beat fast, we still managed to give her a heart beating. Alright, so with a heavy heart, we say goodbye to dummy Muscle Mummy. Which is a shame, because being a gamer, I don't really have much muscles of my own. Although they do sell some good ones at the local fish market. However, with her soul core in our possession, we can now use her as a summon. Which happens to be a really good one. However, her summon can only be used a single time, whereas Evolved Pikachu can be used twice. So I tended to favor that one for that reason. Oh, on an unrelated side note, the wall enemies from the previous games return in this one as well. And the way they work is that they will let you through if you use a gesture from one of the 3 categories. Which one is correct is picked at random, but you will get 2 chances. Meaning that there is a 66.6666, you know, infinite sixes, chance that they will let you through. And no, I'm not rounding that up, because then it would end in a 6, well, you get the idea. However, I did not initially understand the idea behind finding a very fancy looking sword that I could not equip because it turned out to be a key item. Now of course I would happily say with my whole heart, my kingdom for a keyblade, but you know, I don't want to get in trouble with Disney. On top of that, we all know that a Japanese sword that you cannot use is referred to as a katana na 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 na. However, these items are meant for the blacksmith in order to unlock reforging. Which, as a little bit of a critique by the way, I don't like how it works in this game. Since you need to dismantle specific weapons for specific materials for specific categories, instead of merely requiring Umbra Sight, or practically any other material if you simply want to roll for an effect at random. Now granted, that latter method sucked in the previous games as well. But that aside, doing this quest also allowed you to use these keyblades as regular blades. So at least they weren't mere decorative ancient heart effects that belong on display in the heart gallery of a museum or something. In fact, this particular water-imbued one would be the weapon that I used for the remainder of the entire playthrough. I simply kept soul matching it in order to keep its level high enough. Now to add to the water damage of my sword, I also equipped a water-based guardian spirit. However, despite its stats being very helpful, I really disliked its spirit attacks. So in that sense it wasn't actually that helpful at all, and I would soon abandon that one altogether. Also, I only now realized that I actually had an upgraded version of the spin to win strong attack combo ender, or sideways somersault, or winter pepper, or spring sugar, or whatever you want to call it. But the thing is that I honestly have no idea how long I've had it, or where I actually acquired it in the first place. But unlike the unsheath attack, better late than never, I suppose. After all, from Muscle Mummy onwards, the difficulty of the boss fights was going up by quite a margin. Quick, quick! That's whatever. I can't see shit! Heal? But it did work out. At least I think. Hey, come on, die! Just die! Okay, I spoke a little soon there, but... Motherfucker. Yeah, it looks like when designing certain summons that Team Ninja regarded being able to see what the hell is going on is kind of optional. Heck, that even seems evident from their character designs that being able to see is overrated. And although I could at least see that this character was supposed to be the same as the one from earlier, I don't exactly know any of the Nioh stories by heart, but I will try to make this one as easy to understand as open heart surgery. Okay, so we go back much further in time, where we are introduced to Himiko and Huriko. Brother and sister with similar names, but starting with him instead of her and vice versa. Although him is her and her is him. And him is also her and her is also him, and the reason we go back in time is because what's going on with her and him, all started with her and him. Or him and her. Either or.
I can't, what?
I hope you're taking notes because there will be a quiz at the end. Having said that, I myself have some questions for Team Ninja. Well, first of all, why they felt the need to put these urethra monsters into the game, which I simply avoided because urethra monsters are not piss easy, ironically. But my main question would be what they were thinking with the whole stupid duel but not actually duel fight against Kusanagi and Himiko. Because if you ask me, this just doesn't work. Making it the second boss fight in the game that I don't like. In the end, it's not terrible, but the addition of Himiko firing at you from off screen instantly makes the fight worse. This is not like the Demon Prince fight where you can actually see what is coming before it can hit you.
A ninja must look beyond the borders of the screen.
And the least they could have done is to provide you with some sort of a benefit for attacking her instead. But this merely stuns her for a short while, making it not actually worth it. So in the end I tried to stay as much as possible at the edges of the arena, using the speed of ninja mode, waiting for Kusanagi to come to me while staying out of Himiko's reach. With questionable results, I may add, but it was the most effective approach that I could come up with. I'm sure that the good folks at Team Ninja have their hearts in the right place, but duel fights are incredibly difficult to design, and doing it like this is definitely a hard sell, meaning that I'm hardly sold on what they managed to achieve with this one. Regardless, I don't want to sound cold-hearted, because I've definitely seen worse duel boss fights before. And also it wouldn't make sense for me to sound so heartless, because I was getting really close to maxing out my heart stat. Which, to be honest, if I hadn't mentioned that, I'm not sure it was even evident from the actual footage. But of course it was never the point that this would be an effective build in any way, shape or form. However, before going from Himiko to Huriko, what happened is that I got sidetracked by the appearance of a gold chest, indicating a special field boss. And one hell of a fight this turned out to be, with relentless attacks. The Demon of Envy's serpents were quite a pest, and her unending AoEs were a fire tempest, covering the entire freaking arena. And all I had to defend myself from getting doused by this disastrous demonic douche of dazzling damage was my little water buff. Yeah, not gonna lie, I was a little jealous of this demon. Not to mention that her grab attack seems to consist of a combination of 4 attack animations. All in all, this took over an hour of attempts to get through, and especially this attempt over here was absolutely heartbreaking. Thank you, camera. Duck, what the fuck? Why the hell didn't that hit? Son of a fucking fuck up the fucker. And that all fucking day. The fight is cool in principle, but it's it's annoying also as well. You're kind of forced to be very passive, I feel. Because you just have to wait out this entire phase. No! Move, heal, heal. I can't heal! I can't heal! Why can't I heal? What the fuck is that? Can she block your healing for a while or something? Yeah, she's dead. Oh, fucking hell. I know, she has some sort of a short healing block move or something, because I was pressing up like crazy and I just couldn't heal. Alright, good but difficult boss fight. Although what could have caused that no healing glitch at the end, I have no idea. As the French would say, c'est envie. Or whatever they happen to say. Well, when getting back on track, the fight against Huriko was even more difficult and took me nearly 2 hours to get through. Arguably, the hardest fight in the game. Although it was very obvious from the start that there was going to be a second phase. In fact, it would have made more sense to simply start at the second phase, given that the first phase feels kinda meaningless and merely becomes a nuisance on repeated attempts. And yes, I'm going to sound like a broken record again, this is once more an example of where I should have attempted to rely on deflecting, because this boss's attacks are absolutely relentless. He can even still attack you when you end up behind him by extending spikes from his back Omega Shenron style, which nearly gave me a heart attack when it first happened. Now, although I didn't want to resort to go full spamming ninja mode, I did try to get some elemental ninjutsu on him, in the hope of proccing 2 elements at a time, causing the confusion state, where the enemy takes a whopping 50% more damage. But of course, actually trying to capitalize on it afterwards caused a little bit of confusion on my end. The same applied to the red attacks that become nearly invisible in the Dark Realm, where red is literally the only color that remains in the first place, given that the rest of the screen gets eclipsed. Probably something I'm more sensitive to than people with normal eyesight. But in my case, there is nothing I can do, it's a total eclipse of the heart. Fortunately, when you can't see and listening to your heart gets no result, you will simply have to listen to the audio cue indicating the red attack. So good thing that those attacks at least have a specific sound associated with them. Regardless, I really like to press on the game designer's hearts to put clear visibility over things like atmosphere or spectacle, especially for people for whom spectacles are not actually even enough to see everything properly. And to be clear, this is about game design in general, not just this particular game. I got him! Actually got him. Can you die? That's better. Oh my god. It's about fucking time. Okay then, but that wasn't the last that we have seen of Huriko, and in the end, I will finally face off against him Sekiro style. Better late than never. Technically, we fight him again in the next encounter, because we are now going all the way back to the beginning of the game for a rematch with her brother, who was possessed by Huriko all this time. Now, other than deflecting, contrary to yokai bosses, humans can also be traditionally parried, And that seemed like a pretty solid strategy, since Bro doesn't exactly allow us many attack opportunities. This is a quite different type of fight from the NPC mini-bosses that we encountered throughout the game. Moreover, since I was at the end of that particular stream, I chose to revisit the first Crucible to farm for the remaining Crucible skills. Well, I hate farming with all my heart, as my regular viewers know, so in the end I didn't get both of them, but I did acquire Sword of Meditation, aka Lore Walking, aka Aura Farming, which is the only good type of farming, because right after a parry you have just enough time to get this attack in before Brother Dearest can stand up again. And I wouldn't exactly be shocked if this move gets nerfed at some point, because this attack doesn't even require 99 heart to go this hard. Now of course the damage is a payoff for how slow it is and therefore risky to implement, but it does in fact provide you with some pretty decent hyper armor. So if you happen to be very tanky, you might be able to absolutely abuse the fuck out of this move. In addition to that, I'm also proud to say that I finally made it to the final chapter of the game. And what Team Ninja should be proudest of is that they managed to create their most badass character of the franchise, my own personal Oshi, Revolver Oshilot, with 6 bullets, more than enough to kill anything that moves. And even more effective at killing things that stand still, since those are easier to hit. Although things did get unexpectedly easy, given that I skillfully managed to get a parry on him, followed by breaking him by breaking out my broken move. Okay, it was actually by accident, but in my defense, I was trying to finally use Severing Blade during an actual boss fight. But I had it set on mid stance, and I didn't notice that I was in high stance. After all, moves can also be severed between stances, like the 2 chambers of a heart, and either way, it definitely resulted in a strong amount of blood flowing. But, despite a somewhat easy victory, I absolutely have to say that Revolver Oshilot is pretty good.
As for me, I will be singing lead vocal and shredding guitar.
What was next, however, was not. And here I have to start wearing my heart on my sleeve again, because now we are running into a particular grievance I have not just with this game, but with a lot of other games as well. And that is the trend to make games way longer than they should be. We are even guided to the center of the map, but this Crucible is still not the end of the game. Far from it, in fact. But before I continue about that particular issue, there's yet another one with the next boss that I've addressed in the past as well. What I call the flailing spaghetti problem. In principle, this boss design is really interesting and even unsettling. This uncanny possessed golem that then suddenly unleashes this otherworldly presence within. Conceptually, it's actually really cool. Functionally, however, it's not. Because something that is essential in a game that is meant to offer a lot of challenge in its fights is that it should be easy to read what the boss in question is doing. In other words, that the moveset might be difficult to deal with, but that understanding what the moveset consists of in the first place is easy to understand. However, when you make a boss behave like someone is flailing a handful of spaghetti in your face, you have no clue what counts as movement and what counts as an attack animation anymore. Things just turn into an indiscernible mess. In fact, when I got through this fight, I quite literally had no idea how I actually even did it in the first place. Given that for most of the fight I didn't even understand what was going on. So yeah, in that sense I would like to rename this particular boss to Nuribot Not Okay. Regardless, back to the real issue I wanted to address that a lot of games nowadays tend to suffer from, namely stretching things out too much and overstaying their welcome. Especially after it took so long to even get to the final map in the first place. When running around to uncover what remained, it mostly came across like filler content anyway. Especially since we're dealing with more and more reused content. I mean, there was already an Anandra encounter along the way to the Crucible, and that wasn't the first encounter either. And bringing back KFC from Nioh 1 didn't do much for me either. And although Kasha is really fun, bringing her back kinda felt like a third wheel. I even joked during the streams that when seeing the spiders around, that I almost expected Yorogumo to show up as well. And even though I didn't actually encounter her, I later on learned that yes, she is also in the game. Oh, and another Mizuki and Gozuki wandering around, who also show up later simultaneously, even though you already saw another Gozuki get killed when entering the area. Holy hell, I saw so many horses and cows that I developed 1,000 barnyards there. In my opinion, more of a good thing isn't necessarily a good thing. To say it in a YouTube friendly way, imagine getting mouth stuff done to you, but it continues after victory has already been achieved. Just because something is good, or even really good, doesn't imply that it needs to keep going. And it only got worse later on, where the game simply refused to just get to the final boss already. And to be clear, this is a gripe I have with other games as well. Nioh 3 is definitely not the first, and unfortunately won't be the last either. At the very least, there was one major, and I mean major benefit, of checking out what else the map had to offer. Namely, if you had not defeated Okida in the optional area, then later on, he and the fish boss would become a single fight back to back, where if you died against the fish guy, you would have to go back to Okida. Yeah, so much for, oh, just ignore the optional side stuff. In that particular case, it's of vital importance. By now I have actually watched the Backlog's Ninjutsu Oni challenge, and he was evidently, and understandably, unaware of this peculiar and rather childish design decision. And I can only imagine how much of a kick in the nuts it is when you discover it could have been completely circumvented altogether. Because in fairness, Double Fish Guy by himself is already not easy as spices. And sure, perhaps a little bit nitpicky, because it's by no means to the same extent as Nuribot Naruke, but he has some harder to read movements here as well. So it took me a while to get the deflect timings down. I guess that the nautical nonsense is something he wishes, which is why he drops on the deck and flops like two fishes. So from the Dark Realm on, I attempted to tip the skills in my favor, and I decided to stay at a distance and wait for red attacks. Which is easier said than done, because not only is he quite quick, but we're dealing with some big fishes in a small pond. But what I especially wanted to stay away from was his grab attack, at least as much as was possible, because with that hitbox there seems to be something fishy going on. So to me at least, a patient approach seemed to be the most efficient approach. And that allowed me to put an end to the fishes. Or instead of end I should say, fin. Unfortunately, we are still not finished. And taking a patient approach for what was next, well, let's just say I took more of a mental patient approach. In my opinion, this is simply where the final boss should have been. Or perhaps some sort of quote-unquote victory lap together with Himi and co. But instead, there was still a hard road ahead of us. Namely a massive gauntlet of wave after wave of enemies and even bosses together that you've already fought before. However, to me, none of this felt like some sort of accumulation of everything that you went through coming to its natural conclusion. But instead just chaos for the sake of chaos and stretching out the game's length for the purpose of stretching out the game's length. And once again, this is far from the only game that does this. Lies of P, for example, also had unnecessary filler areas after Luxasia, who already was at the end of a way too long castle area. For comparison, imagine that if in Elden Ring, after you enter the Earth Tree, after fighting Godfrey, you first had wave after wave of previously encountered enemies, before finally reaching the final fight. Again, more of a good thing is not always better. That's just simply not how it works. So if I could directly talk to game designers, just all of them in general, I would want to say from the bottom of my heart, when you get to the end of your game, end the fucking game. Of course, what makes it even worse is that when you get frustrated because of that and trying to rush your way through, it only ends up taking even longer, because it's not designed to just rush your way through. At the very least, each of the 4 waves in the stupid death filler section is counted separate from each other. Otherwise I probably would have ripped Team Ninja's hearts out with my teeth in Minecraft. But eventually, we did get to the final boss. And at the very least, it was one worthy of being a final boss. The rematch with Huriko, but quite different from the previous fight, and worthy of being an epic final showdown. So at least when the game finally comes to an end, it does end on a high note. But what became evident from the fireballs thrown around after dodging his attacks, is that this would have to come down to going full Sekiro mode. Heck, even the spikes that come out of the ground can be deflected somehow. I guess we're really dealing with some Wolong influences here. I even switched to low stance, not merely to consume even less ki, but in order to make use of the night range skill. You know, that flurry of attacks. Given that that's much better damage than you would expect from a low stance specific skill. So it took a long time to get here, but one final beating remained. One final fight to put all of my heart into. And there we are. And you know what the most beautiful thing was about this ending? That I happened to finish this playthrough on Valentine's Day. And when the dust settled and all was said and done, it turned out that Brother Dearest did have his heart in the right place. So after having one final heart-to-heart with him, I did not have the heart to end his life. How could I with 99 of it? Regardless, my heart will go on until I'm king of the world. Well, shogun of Japan more specifically. Although I finally learned what that meant. It means that I now get to live wearing a stupid little hat. How does that feel? Well, a Valentine-y bit underwhelming, to be honest. But at least the game itself did not disappoint. It did go on too long, but other than that, the game was incredibly well designed. Definitely a few things here and there that I would change, but this was arguably the best entry in the trilogy. So hopefully for those among you who never felt like giving this franchise a try, hopefully by now, for you, it won't be such a hard sell anymore.